stand up so we can say the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks for coming out on a snowy day. Just a few words about some of the programs you have coming up. Next month on the 20th at 7 p.m. I said 7 p.m. So we're not going to do it at 2. We're moving to our 7 p.m. March through the rest of the year schedule. We'll be having Thomas Reichstedt, who's going to be talking about Mark Twain in Western New York. So that should be a pretty interesting program as well. In April, on the 17th at 7 p.m., Frank Clement on brick making. He's from the Masonry Museum in Orchard Park. So that should be a very interesting one too. And lastly, the one we've got scheduled in May is for the 15th at 7 p.m. And that will be Greg Gerstone on the trolleys that went to Alcott, which I didn't even know there was. So that should be an interesting program as well. Along with that, as you know, Das House will be opening up. It happens to be on May 4th, which is the first Sunday in May at 2 p.m. So please feel free to drop by and talk, take a tour. We have a little campus there, as you probably know. We have the Das House Museum. We have the Einhaus, which is a original timber frame construction home built by the Germans that inhabited Burkholz. It's been moved from where it was originally and put on our museum property and reconstructed. So you can really see how the old German Fachwerk, which is timber frame, no metal, pegs, and mortise and tenon construction actually happened. So please feel free to come over there and join us. And that brings us to today. We have John Montague from the Buffalo Maritime Center. He's going to be talking about the Seneca Chief and things related. Right?
The Erie Canal, right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I was a little worried about the weather, and I got here way too early. And I thought, well, maybe they've called it off, but I see you guys last minute. You got here right on time. First of all, I want to say I really appreciate these small museums around the state like this. I mean, it's really kind of like in the whole kind of structure of history and writing history and so forth. That's really the front line. I mean, finding the stuff, finding the artifacts, finding the people that have the memories, that have the photographs, and so forth. So it's a really important thing, and I particularly like it when I'm like traveling around the country and I come to one of these places and they got handwritten labels on things and so forth. You probably think like, oh my God, only these people know this thing is here, you know. It hasn't sort of made it, you know, to the National Gallery or whatever. So that's really important work, and it's really important to support that. And like so many other things that are done on this scale, it's really what kind of binds communities together. That's one of the kind of lessons we found about building this canal boat, which I'll get into in detail, that it was really a community effort. It still is a community effort. Well, let me go back just a little bit. We're from the Buffalo Maritime Center. I was the founder of the Buffalo Maritime Center back when it was a part of Buffalo State College. We were I was a design historian in the design department, and was very much involved in historic preservation, building preservation, and so forth. When I came to Buffalo, I was at the University of Wisconsin where I got my Ph.D., and I was actually in medieval. So I did a lot of study of German architecture, medieval German architecture, but primarily it was French architecture. But when I came, I developed this idea, this kind of broad idea about art history was like too narrow, and architectural history too narrow a subject, because all these things that are designed, I mean, virtually everything we're involved with now, even nature, is designed. Someone's making decisions about how putting things together and so forth. That's the bigger subject. So I was part of a national group that were sort of trying to turn the discipline, broaden the discipline. So we developed this field called the history of design. And I came to Buffalo because they had a huge design department at that time at Buffalo State, about 40-some people. They had had all of the crafts, they had, you know, fashion design, they had graphic design, they had all these things that were not really studied in art history. So when I showed up for the interview, which happened to be in Toronto, they were complaining that the art historians were not teaching the kinds of things that their students needed to know, you know. They study Picasso and Rembrandt or whatever, and you can go out and become a graphic designer. And they wanted to know what about the history of graphic design. Anyway, I had a package all ready to go for them, and so anyway, I got the job. But when I got here, I was blown away with Buffalo, particularly, and the architecture in this area. I mean, one of the things that struck me that this Buffalo, particularly, and all up through here, really ought to be a national Victorian museum. I mean, we've got architecture here in such vast numbers that other towns have, you know, people who travel around the country, most of the interiors of towns have been obliterated by, you know, gas stations or funeral homes or whatever, you know. Buffalo, I was stunned by this. And that isn't just counting the major kind of architecture here, from all the great architects, you know, Frank Lloyd Wright, Louis Sullivan, and so forth. Anyway, so I was thrilled with that. And so got immediately involved in historic preservation. It was kind of like, this was 1984, it was like a fresh guy coming to town, so, you know, all of a sudden I was on, you know, this committee and that committee, this board and that board, and so forth. While I was at Buffalo State, you know, doing my design pictures, there were a couple of colleagues, a furniture designer, and also the guy happened to be head of the department. We realized we had a history of boats. I worked in St. Petersburg, I built some boats. St. Petersburg, Florida, I have to say now, I used to Leningrad. Anyway, St. Petersburg, Florida. So I was really into boats and sailing and so forth. So on. I love to hear all this, 90 miles of fresh water right in the city. It was amazing. So anyway, this other guy and I, the two of us together sort of realized we were reading Wooden Boat magazine, which is sort of the classic boat magazine, and you know, I'm into that. Anyway, so we said, you know, why don't we build some boats? You know, we've got all the equipment. There's a great thing about the design. We had all the kinds of shops, metal shops, wood shops, you know, forges, foundries, and so forth, everything there to build anything we want. So we actually, what we did is we set up a course to teach boat building use boat building as a method of teaching design principles, form and function and history and culture. I mean, people had boats actually before they had houses. I mean, this was like, you know, all civilizations grew up on the water at some point, or began on the water. So it has a rich, deep history. So there's nothing better than, if you're going to talk about all these principles of design and how you design things and why you design things and all of that, a boat is a perfect thing to work with. So we did kind of an experimental thing. The furniture designer had just come back. He'd been up in Maine. He was interested in trying to make, he liked the forms of boats, like the rudder shapes and so forth. And he thought, you know, that's really cool. I need to study boat building, you know, because he liked the idea of making a coffee table, the shape of the rudder and that. He got up there and said, you know, screw that. Says a boat's a boat, a rudder's a rudder. You know, a sail's a, you know, it's like, don't try to make something else out of it. So he was totally enamored of the whole idea. Came back, got us fired up. So we had a beginning course with, I think there were like 11 freshman girls that it was a short course, like Introduction to Wood Design or whatever. And he said, rather than do these dovetail joints and do these sort of little, you know, fussy things to show you how you cut this and cut that and so forth, why don't we build a kayak? So they built one kayak, a wooden kayak, a beautiful wooden kayak, in about 4 weeks or so, and then they drew straws for who got it. Well, that was the beginning of the boat program, actually, because the next semester we built 20 kayaks. Everybody wanted their own, you know, to see one student go off with a kayak, you know, well, everybody, anyway, and the next semester were 40. And then just all hell broke loose in the design department because we were sucking everybody's students away from ceramics and fashion design and everything else. They all wanted a boat, and and their parents even liked the idea because they graduate from something other than a piece of paper. They would actually have something physical. There were all kinds of reasons why there was enthusiasm about that, and we drew in people from all parts of the college, particularly people in biology who were studying fish and wildlife and so forth. They need boats. You know, when you think about it, you stop. And particularly in an area like this, everybody needs one, right? But you need to borrow one. Anyway.
Sure.
So we within a very short period of time, developed what was called the Center for Watercraft Studies. Let me actually give you actually start. And that kind of developed into a very sophisticated program. We started out with some students from the Native American school, which was right near the college. Some people from the I think it was the assistant superintendent of schools at Buffalo, was trying to get Native American kids on campus, just to break down that barrier, you know, instead of like, yeah, I'm not going to college, it's over there. Get them there to meet professors and do some programs. So we did, they paid for us to build 3 small boats, 3 little prams, which we did with these kids, and it was startling to us. We did not expect what would happen. When we built these boats with the kids, they would come in, and there's so many, you know, there's so many programs for kids that come in. They all have, as they now just call, attitude. You know, you don't even say bad attitude, you mean attitude. They've all got attitude. They come in and pile of wood over here, pile over there, and say, we're going to build a boat. It's like, yeah, right, okay, whatever, you know. But when we got to that point, that moment where they pulled the thing together and they stood back and they saw it, no, it's a 3-dimensional. You mean this is a real boat? I can get it? Yeah, you know, we said it's a real boat. You're going to be, you mean we can get in it? We can float in it? Something magical happened. All of a sudden, they wouldn't even break for the pizza. Can I take my pizza over and still work on the boat? You know, and you know, that's okay. You can wash it off later. But anyway, we realized, oh my God, this is really something. And so we actually started doing outreach programs. This is all above and beyond the call of duty, such as it was at the college, the 3 of us. So we started this outreach program. Started to work with kids from various schools. From one guy joined us, one of the doctors at the Children's Hospital, bringing in families that had somebody was in the hospital, wasn't necessarily the one building the boat, but the family and so forth. We worked with a lot of the inner city schools and so forth. Many kids in Buffalo didn't even know, believe it or not, didn't even know the water was there. I mean, the buses don't run that way. They run north and south. You can't get there from here, etc. So the whole idea of building a boat, of knowing about the water, of floating even, was quite an amazing thing. But that developed, and we also developed simultaneously, which was our real job, was the academic piece of this. And if any of you are involved with schools or school systems or teachers or whatever, you know, getting some new course approved always has to go through all kinds of hoops. One of the main ones is it really has to sound serious. It can't sound like it's fun. It can't sound like you know, people would really love it. You know, so part of the strategy of getting that going was to kind of create a how would I say, kind of an advertising campaign. So we decided we were going to call this new program the Center for Watercraft Studies. That doesn't sound like any fun, right? The Center for Watercraft Studies. So that actually got it through the curriculum committee, and we actually started doing it. And so we developed courses in the history of naval architecture and boats and culture, as well as various boat building courses. We started out with fairly simple boats, and within a year we developed and designed a boat, the one in the background there, which is called the 6-hour canoe, which is actually a boat, people say, does it sink in 6 hours? Or, you know, no, it actually theoretically takes you 6 hours to build. It's built out of dimensional lumber, so someone could just go to the hardware store, get some door skins, you know, 4x8 door skins, 2 sheets of plywood, and some 1x2s, and so then you can build that boat, which uses a double paddle. You can make that out of the extra pieces that are left over from the sides of the boat and a closet rod. So we wrote a book about this, and we were told by Wooden Boat Magazine it was the best-selling book, the best-selling boat building book for many, many years. We did this way back in 92 or something like 92. The secret of that is sort of the Henry Ford thing. It's a cheap book and it's a cheap boat. I mean, that's how you sell a lot of them, okay? This was no luxury yacht, but they're wonderful boats. We probably, I would say over 1,000 of these boats got built. So we started building these. We started building with students. We started building with programs and so on, and we're still building them now. This program started out working with different individuals in, like, as I said, Children's Hospital, some of the schools. Now we have expanded it. We actually have a sort of traveling, our version of the
the food truck. I mean, we have a van and a four-wheel trailer, enclosed four-wheel trailer, has all of the equipment in, solar-powered power tools and so forth, with solar panels on the top. And we go around to different places in the summer and in the spring and the summer and so forth, and do these programs at school, as well as doing a number over the years. When we actually left the college in '06, when I retired, we took it with us. This is another thing. They say you can't take it with you. Well, you can take it part of the way anyway. If I ultimately want to take it with me, but at least for that transition, I took it with me. We became a 501c3 and not-for-profit, which really allowed us to kind of do a lot more interesting things. I just want to show you this picture, the boat in the front. We worked with students from the nearby high school, which is Riverside High School, which was basically a school in the last number of years, which has been primarily refugee kids. So there were multiple languages, everything from very few Germans. I don't think there were any, but French-speaking Africans and Swahili and so forth. So it was a really wonderful group. And we started out with simple boats with them. We built the boats. We did all the boats in Hoyt Lake and right by the museum there. We started that livery. Our whole idea was to get people on the water, get people back in touch with the water. We have worked with for probably six or 7 years now, the St. Mary's School for the Deaf. And this is like a wonderful thing for them. I mean, and we've learned, some of our people have learned sign language. I'm really slow at sign language. I can sort of do my name, but they laugh, But, it's like, we have a little thing where before the woman here who's running this program says, everybody, they have to teach us one word. Each person has to teach us one word. And of course, when we try to do it, it's like, the height of their day, to see us bumbling through that. Anyway, so we started building more and more. We did outreach programs. We started building more and more sophisticated boats. We started out with these simple ones, but part of and this was part of my conception of it originally, before we even got into all this working with kids business, was that we needed to explore the history of boats in the Niagara frontier. I mean, this used to be a major port in the world, even though it was on the Great Lakes. I mean, all of that traffic from the Midwest came to Buffalo and Tonawanda and so forth on the Erie Canal. There were all kinds of boats here, plus the Finger Lakes, plus the different rivers and so forth. Every area traditionally worldwide, areas will develop the designs of specific kinds of boats that are adapted to the specific kinds of waters. So that was what I was kind of researching on. So we started exploring those. We went up to Wooden Boat School up in Maine, into Mystic Seaport, and all of those organizations, and which is quite amazing to me, were more than generous in helping us out and kind of supporting us in this. I mean, they were seeing what we were doing as an extension of what they were doing. Like the Mystic Seaport, which is the biggest, the mother of them all, in Mystic, Connecticut. They were thrilled to help us, to give us things, to give us plans, to mentor us, to invite us to different kinds of conferences and so forth. Wooden Boat Magazine, which is kind of the premier magazine for boat builders and traditional boat builders and so forth. The editor is the one who kind of said, one boat that we really want to know about is the Buffalo Harbor Ferry, which is a very unique boat that was built for the Buffalo Harbor. It says, and he gave me a picture of Buffalo in 1840. He says, why don't you build this? So we did. I did a photograph, reverse the perspective of the photograph, was able to get the plans, basically, reaching into the picture, pulling the information out. We built the boat, gave the first one to the History Museum, and then we built dozens more. Anyway, as we worked at this, we got more and more sophisticated. The boat on the right-hand side here is a Buffalo Lake Erie Shallop, which was an 1885 boat that was very common in this area. It was sort of the primary fishing boat. They fished for whitefish on this end of Lake Erie down to about just beyond Erie toward Cleveland. Had a very distinct rig and so forth. Westfield, those areas down there all had these boats all along that shore. So we built one of those, 28-foot long boat, traditional boat. Then later we built the boat on the end here, which is an electric boat. This is about in '06 or something. We built the electric boat. which, like the boats in the Panama, or the Pan American exhibition, which they had on White Lake. And those are very common from like the 1890s or so. So we built that boat. We use all of these boats out of the harbor. The other one is a boat that was that we built, which is a New England boat that ended up in this area. Anyway, we were into this idea of constantly building and researching local boats. So we had an event which we had an opportunity, like in about 1993 or so, to build the boat, the lifeboat, kind of, it's called a captain's gig, for the schooner America. They're doing a replica of the 1850 schooner America, which was the one that started the America's Cup. That's what America's Cup is named after, this boat. They're building that in Albany, so they asked us to build. So we put an ad in the paper. Remember the newspaper? Put an ad in the paper, and then people, oh, here's the paper, you know. Hey, they're building this boat at Buffalo State. They're asking for volunteers who want to build a traditional boat. So we put that ad in the paper. We got about 20 guys show up. You kind of look like the type, so I must say, this slight touch of gray, you know, maybe a little facial hair and so forth. The ones who could spend some time doing these kinds of things. And they showed up, and we started on Wednesday nights, we started working on this boat, building it in a very, very traditional boat. When that was finished, and we delivered the boat to Albany, and it then rode around the back of the schooner America around the world, the boat was doing its tours, he said, so what's next? And we're thinking like, you know, I'm going to take a nap. I mean, so that's what's next. And so we realized we kind of created a so-called monster, a group of people we affectionately at those times called the geezers. Now I'm a total geezer myself, so you know, these were definite group of people that were excited about this and interested in this. So we had to keep coming up with other kinds of projects. So while we were doing this and building these boats, and we got more and more complicated boats and sophisticated boats as we got into this, and kind of one project after another, digging through archives and so forth to find images, photographs of traditional boats. We became very involved in the development of the harbor. And I had come here, and I mentioned I came here in '84. I'm very excited about the architecture in this area, and kind of as an extension of that, interested in the harbor and the naval architecture of this area. So naturally, I was interested, and our folks were interested in the history of the harbor and sort of constituting the history of the harbor. And if you may remember that time, this is like 40 years ago, the people had turned their back on the harbor. I mean, they had, you know, they've done the small boat harbor and a few other little things like that, but basically most people, including the mayor and the politicians and so forth, would stand with their back to the water, looking towards Cheektowaga, and they would, that was the Buffalo, where they would look at the Rust Belt over here, they look at, you know, Love Canal, I guess this way. I didn't run over, did I? Anyway, you know, that's what they were thinking about. And when I came, I remember coming for the interview, and I'm blown away. I said, oh my God, the county has like 90 miles of fresh water flowing right by it. I mean, what country in the world wouldn't want that? You know, and yet you couldn't find a postcard of the waterfront. You couldn't find anything that, postcards, remember that's a newspaper. Anyway, you know, you couldn't find anything like that. And I thought, there's something missing here. So that became a kind of a mission of mine. And then of course things were underway. And you know, and this is by the 90s, this is well into, not the governor again. Where is it? Sorry about that.
It's somewhere.
Is that me? Maybe it's not me. It sounds like me.
No, it's over there somewhere.
Where is it?
No, not me.
Okay, this is. I'm a bad guest.
Oh,
Maybe they've
about to
given
say.
up. Okay. Maybe it's the IRS.
Here.
Okay, all right. Sorry. Okay, all right. That's actually the guy from the Maritime Center. Anyway, all right. deal with that later. Where was I? Oh yes, I was all enthusiastic about the waterfront. So we decided we're going to take on the waterfront. Back even in the early '90s, I did a plan for a taxi system in a lot of other cities. I'd travel around and see many waterfronts around the world and how different cities and so on dealt with it. So this became a passion of mine. And then along about the late 90s, remember last century, I said we need to take this to the city, the powers that be, the waterfront commission and so forth. We need to get this, we need something to build this waterfront around. And it occurred to me at that time, you may remember Buffalo, this whole area had this kind of dismal attitude. I had come to town, I had a job, I found the housing here was so inexpensive compared to where I come from. So I was thrilled. And other people were discouraged. I got to get out of this place. This is, they were ready to leave town and so forth and so on. So I understand the kind of the dismal attitude and so forth. But I came, as many other people did who came to town at that time, kind of with fresh eyes, like, you don't realize what a great place this is. You don't realize what incredible things you have here. So my strategy was to say, look at, they were doing all this thing, talking proud. They were, they had sports teams, and if they lost, everybody was down, and they were high, everybody, but the city was still there. So I said, well, look at what's on this seal of Buffalo, okay? You got the lighthouse still there. You got sailboats on the river there. You got Canada still over there for now. Anyway, and then you've got a canal boat. I mean, this logo captures graphically what made Buffalo what it was. This is a sort of Romulus and Remus. It's its origin story. Okay, this is what made this place what it is. This is what we have. And so, this was somewhat more convincing to people than some of the other more abstract things we were trying. This, incidentally, is from my garbage can, which I think has a certain panache to it. Same thing, though, but look, there's been a canal boat on my garbage can. I mean, it's sort of in your face. This is what we need to do. So what had to happen, and what was beginning to happen at that time, was that they were starting to. We weren't the only ones who were involved with this, but Higgins and other politicians and so forth were really trying to do something with the waterfront. And one of the major things that happened was the rewatering of the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal had been buried right in downtown over the years for various reasons and so forth. Mainly, dead horses and other things floating. It wasn't really just like they filled the Erie Canal in Syracuse when my parents were back in the 1930s. And I said, oh, no, that's too bad. No, it was really awful. It was like really an open sewer. Anyway, it was a source of pestilence. But anyway, then now they wish they hadn't. But the same happened here. So they redug the canal in the place where it was supposed to be, and suddenly they revealed, in people's minds certainly, one of the most significant places in the history of the United States, which is this little space between where the big sailboat is on the end, at the end there. That's where the East Coast met 1,500 miles of interior waterways into the interior of the country. So this was the place, this was the gateway to the West. And, even though St. Louis has that arch, they tore down thousands of houses to build Saarinen Arch, great arch, he gets an A+ on that. And so, and claim that's the gateway to the West. No, this is the gateway to the West. We have a little sign up there that says Erie Canal Terminus. That's all we had. So that's a sacred spot. That's something to build on. So we immediately jumped on this. When the canal, a lot of things we were involved in all of the negotiations about this as well, because we were quasi-experts, or if we didn't, we pretended to be. Anyway, but as soon as that opened up, we immediately stuck our boats in there. Here's our electric boat back here. These are two War of 1812 bateaux that we built with community boats. This is a Buffalo Harbor ferry. That's that little unique boat that was typical of Buffalo. A couple of our other boats over here, the Skajackwada, which is an electronic boat, and also the bike ferry. which was another of our ideas, which we promoted and redesigned and so forth and so on. Anyway, so we jumped right on. This was our thing, and now, quite miraculously, we still sort of control that area. You know, it's kind of feel a little bit like a mob boss. We were the first ones who knew we haven't got. We got this, you know, don't park there. You know, we got to keep the historic boats there. So the idea was that we really need to focus on this area, and Erie Canal is really the subject matter. That's the new subject matter. That Buffalo is created by the Erie Canal, and this was like back in, and we started doing this, you know, back in the late '90s. The Erie Canal bicentennial was 25 years away. You know, I was a young man. And it was started in 1817, so we kind of worked up to that. But we were all upset when we were designing boats for War of 1812. It took a little while for that infrastructure to come into place. But just to go back to, and I know you've had someone speak already on the Erie Canal, and there's way more. The deeper you dig on this, you know, the more information is virtually endless. But let me just say a couple of critical things about the Erie Canal, just on the level of appreciation of the importance of this. The Erie Canal really was the first time that the 13 original colonies and the settlements on the coast, the English settlements on the coast, were able to break through into the Western territories, which after the Revolution they all claimed. I mean, Massachusetts ran all the way to California, if you actually believed, you know. But that didn't belong to Massachusetts unless they could settle it, unless they could get people there, unless they could control it. You can say we own all that, but not unless you get a grip on it with actual settlement. So it was very slow getting through the Appalachian Mountains, and the run of Appalachian Mountains had only one crack in it, which was the Mohawk River, and way back even as late as the late 17th century, explorers were saying this is the way to get to the west. This is where we need one day to build a canal. I mean, they were even thinking that in the late 16th century, 17th century. So anyway, that's what DeWitt Clinton had promoted. The Virginians didn't want it because they were trying to build one in Virginia. Jefferson was against it. He thought this was madness and so forth. That story's familiar now, but what happened is that Clinton went back to New York State and got the New York State people to say, let's build the canal. So it was a New York State project, okay? And we could go into this for hours, and I have, in the situation. But basically, building the Erie Canal, when they built it, where they built it, had enormous effect. One of the big effects, results of this was that all of this wealth that was arising, was available, raw materials and information, and later manufacturing, so it came through the Great Lakes systems, all that drainage area, and even the Mississippi, through Buffalo, through Albany to New York City. And it was actually that commerce in New York City that made New York City the premier commercial capital of the world. If it had not been done when it was done, it wouldn't have been New York City. It probably would have been 10 years later. All of that would have gone to New Orleans. New Orleans would have been the New York City of America. And the result of that, 30 years later, the Civil War might have been completely different had the South had that, and New York City was just a kind of a minor coastal city. I mean, it wasn't a minor city, but it was smaller than Boston or Philadelphia before the Erie Canal. So that's like, and of course, the people in New York, this is how farsighted most people are. Most of the people are, it's going to ruin our farms on Long Island if we get these apples from Medina and so forth. I mean, short-sighted, but long-term, that's what it created. It also created a money economy in the frontier, which meant that people out in the frontier could buy things instead of having to just give you a cow for 2 pigs and a hank of hair or something. Now they could actually have a money economy, and they could start doing manufacturing all along the Erie Canal. I mean, every town along the Erie Canal had some special thing they did: carpets, apples, whatever. All the way, the founding of Chicago, all of those, Milwaukee, all of those cities in the Midwest. where many, I should say, speaking to the Germanic group, where many Scandinavians and Germans eventually moved. All right, so
That's right.
that was one thing. The other thing was that by the time the Civil War came, the people from sort of advanced progressive people from Germany, from Northern Europe and so forth, and from New England as abolitionists, filled up these northern states. So by the time that happened, the northern states were non-slave states. That's what really had the Erie Canal not been built, Southerners were coming up the Ohio River, coming up the Mississippi, and so forth, and that would have been a completely different thing. That's only a small issue there. Now, so about 1995, in about 1997, 98, I started doing drawings and paintings of the Erie Canal and reviewing things. We started working with just about every, political entity or individual we could to kind of convince them that this was a good idea for us to develop this harbor as a kind of an Erie Canal harbor, or sort of focus on that aspect of it. And the idea was that we wanted this to be a community effort to build a canal boat. Canal boat, that's the one thing was missing in the logo, from the logo, what was missing in the harbor. You look at that ditch, here's the Erie Canal, but like just a ditch. And we wanted to keep jet skis out of it, and keep, keep the gigantic plastic tubs out of it, because it's a historic thing. So we, what do? We build the canal boat. That becomes the iconic image. I just put this up because Gene Bunnell is a city planner, wrote this book and published it last year about virtually all the stuff we did and the other citizens groups and so forth to get this to happen. And that's available. The SUNY Press has done that. So we had to we were going to build a canal boat. So we had our group. We had multiple generations of that group that started way back, the original geezers that built that boat. So we said, all right, we'll build a canal boat, but how do you build it? I mean, what is it like? This was the canal boats and research that we had done. The canal boats were not, there were no photographs of them. It was before photography. And boats like this were essentially pieces of what is not fair to call it folk art, but they were not built, as most architecture was not built by architects or by doing plans and elevations and measured drawings. They were done by people who knew how to build it. You didn't ask a guy, give me some plans for the barn you're going to build. You said, build a barn. How big do you want it? And pace it off. And how long? What's the longest timber you got? Okay. And there were things like that that would indicate, how you build. And then they would do it. They know how to do it. They know how to frame a window. They know how to frame a door. They know how to do all this. They know how to cut the moldings and so on. So there was, and this is true of most buildings. Most people don't realize this, even in fairly formal architectural buildings, that there were generally no plans. Plans come in oftentimes after the fact when the city wants to know how big the building is. Is it made of brick? That comes in afterward. So they take some guy's folk art, or whatever, measure it off and come up with plans. This is true in boat building from the beginning. Okay? There are really no measured plans of historic vessels, including sea-going ships, square riggers and so forth, until really the very end of the 17th century, the beginning of the 18th century, when the British fighting with the Dutch or fighting with the French or whatever, there would be a boat that was kind of outgunning them, outrunning them and so forth. They would capture that boat and they would take that boat back and try to figure out, sort of reverse engineer it. What did they do? How is this boat different? How is its shape different? And that's when they started drawing plans for boats. So we're going to build one of those. Okay. There were other issues I could get into that come from my background in sort of medieval architecture, but most people didn't do really high-end math. Adding and subtracting was about as far as you wanted to go. So you'd build things with templates. You'd make things. You'd build a half model, for example. You sort of feel that feels like a fast boat. Maybe I'll widen it out here a little bit and so forth. I mean, there was actually a famous naval architect, Herreshoff, who did a lot of America's Cup boats and so forth. He had a blind brother, and his brother would do these half models. Couldn't see, you know, and he would, yeah, that's much better, you know. Anyway, and then they would take that, slice it up like toast, you know, and then lay those pieces down, that would give you the frames, they would draw plans from that. So this was very much a kind of a tactile method of building. You do things like experiment by, you know, make the sail a little taller, whoa, you know, make it a little shorter, that's better, you know. And then finally you'd get one, and Grandpa did it right, he had a great, and that was, it's a legitimate way of building. The pyramids were built the same way, and so were the cathedrals, by templates, by just a rough idea. You pace it off, you mark it off, and then you'd start to build it. Anyway, the problem was that we're trying to build one of these and build it as authentically as possible, so how do you find out what they were really like? One of the problems with boats, as opposed to architecture, is usually they leave a foundation of some kind you can kind of play with. When a boat is built, it slides off the waves, and it sinks, or it disappears somewhere, so it's never to, or it rots, so it's never to be seen again. And so unless you have some tactile connection, some artifact to put together, it's very difficult to reconstruct it. So that's what we had to do, and that was sort of primarily my job, is to go through as many images as I could of boats, of canal boats, and find whatever models I could find or whatever. And I did this for a number of years actually, trying to develop what would this kind of boat, how would this boat be built. We finally, after putting all of that together, and I'm saving you an awful lot of slides in here, I worked out patterns. It was like doing a bird book or whatever. Like, these are all the shapes of the bows. These are all the shapes of the stern. These are all the shapes of the way the cabins were done, the proportions. And so it had, you know, charts of all of these things that gave you basically what's the vocabulary, okay? What's the vocabulary for a boat from this time, from this period? Once we got the plans done, we know how to build a boat. I mean, we built a lot of boats from this era. We know about that, and there's a lot of information on surviving boats of how this was done. So we knew how, if we could get the plans done, we knew how to build it. So we did get the plans done. We drew them up. We had to send them to a naval architect in Albany in order to pass all the requirements for the Coast Guard and so forth. This is something else they didn't have to worry about in the past. You know, it was like, whoa, that's a boat sunk. I guess we'll build it a different way this time. Instead of like, don't you build a boat that's going to sink, which is how you kind of do that ahead of time today. Anyway, so we came up with this, and somebody at Fisher Price said, well, let me do a computer version of that, and that was just one of the many things in the plans. I did, you know, hundreds of drawings of this as we kind of worked through it. So we had the plans, we knew how to build a boat, and we had, at least my good friend, a new guy that we just hired, an old friend of mine, who's a professional shipwright, he had the confidence we could do it. And I'm thinking, I'm glad you do, because this is like, but once we kind of got into it, and another good reason for having plans is we had to do all this calculation, how much is it going to cost, how much lumber are we going to need, what kind of lumber are we using. All of those issues had to be done, had to be worked out. And as I get into the pictures, the drawings of it, I'll show you more about that. But that was a very difficult thing. But is there enough white oak in western New York to build this boat? They were built out of white oak and cedar. Anyway, the other thing was so we got the plans done. We were ready to go, and we had thought we had convinced some of the people in the city that we could build the boat in Buffalo, in the harbor, and so forth. But we wanted to build it in public. And this was a key piece of what we were doing in the whole project, was to build this with the public, in public, and for the public. This is not a private project. This is not a money-making scheme. This is not a self-serving thing for the Maritime Center. It was a public project. And the whole idea of that, the more people that get involved in this are going to be involved in the Erie Canal, they're going to be involved in the harbor, they're going to be involved in the city. And the concept that I was sort of operating on from the beginning was that this was really an issue of Buffalo's identity. I mean, Buffalo needed an identity. What is this? What makes Buffalo Buffalo? And if we could kind of arrange these iconic objects in a way that when people are in Buffalo, as when they're in Paris, you know, oh, Eiffel Tower, I must be in Paris. They would, you know, that would be something that we hang on to. And of course, that's actually worked brilliantly, I must say. I mean, you know, we have kind of put the picture back together, and we've been able, and we found over the process of building this boat, we've been able to kind of put Buffalo on the map as something other than a Rust Belt city with a bunch of discouraged people in it. Of course, a lot of other things have happened that have helped Buffalo, and that the Buffalo Bills. I mean, not that we're, you know, in that category, but that was exactly what the project was. It was going to be a community project. So we wanted to build it in public. And again, we ran into the same people, the same naysayers that didn't really want to, didn't think the boat idea, having the boat tied up in here was a good idea. And I should say, just as an aside, although it was very, very important, I had written some articles for the paper and about this, about, you know, we need to build this boat, and I gave out the same arguments I'm giving you about why we need to do this, and why this, with the Erie Canal now bicentennial coming over the horizon, this is about 2017, you know, people are actually talking about it, this is an opportunity not to be missed. There was a guy out in Clarence, far away from the water in Clarence, who had read those articles and came by the boat shop one day, big 6'5" guy comes wanted in, and I think, well, he's another $65 member. I'll give him the tour of the boat shop. It's a boat shop in Riverside, and he says, "Wow, this is great what you guys are doing." We told him about our outreach programs and so on. And he says, we went up to the library. We have, which is welcome to come to anytime. Anyway, we went up to the library and said, "I want to know how you're financing this boat." I said, well, a lot of people come in and say, "I got a great idea. Why don't you, you know, sell armbands or something?" You know, well, anyway, so we're used to this, people, and so we showed, we told them about our financing, what banks we were using, and what foundations were helping us, and so forth. And he said that we gave him the whole financial layout, and he says we had a lot of programs in there for, you know, teaching programs that would go with this and so on. And he says, "I can't do all of those," he says, "but I'll pay for the boat." You know, I mean, we kind of pulled our jaws off the table. Thanks, you know. He says, "No," he says, I'll pay for the boat." And then the best part, if any of you have been involved, I'm sure you're with this museum, you know, trying to get grants and so forth and so on. Yeah, you're going to get it, but you won't get it for 3 years unless you. He said, now it's a Friday. He says, now the banks are closed. Probably if you got a local bank, then you have the M&T around the corner. He says, well, I will make a deposit there, but it probably won't get there till Wednesday. Oh, Wednesday's fine. You know, usually if someone gives you something vague over the horizon, like one day, you know, we may worry, or I'll give you a penny now and one next week or whatever. So this guy was serious, and this is what I realized, you know, power of the pen. It was like, oh my God, I wrote this stuff out, and he read it, and he liked it, and so forth. Now, what happened with that was that, and this is another, I'm learning all these lessons, political lessons, and so as we're going through this, what happens is that once you break that dam, other people want to get on board. So, hey, I bought this Microsoft stock here. And some guy comes and he buys 1,000. So, oh, maybe I'll buy some more of that. I mean, this is what happened. People bought into it because they believed in it, and he pushed us up over that lip. And of course, all the politicians who were so negative about this, they said, we've always thought this was a good idea. And then I realized, how do I respond to this? You know, this is one of those things like, I told you. No, I can't say that. You never get to say, I told you so. You never get to do that. It's just like, it's so unsatisfying. But, you know, I bit my lip and thank you, okay? And they did get behind it. So they said, all right, we had for a long time, we had been hitting them. So we said, when we build this boat, we need to build it in public. This is for the public, by the public, with the public. It's a public thing. It's about public image. It's about the image of the city. We went through all of this. I know. And said we want to build it right down on the waterfront. And they had already they'd made lawns in the canal side area. That says Pierce Lawn there. I said, well, that's really where we need to build it. Right, this is the terminus of the Erie Canal right here. Those are the naval ships here. We want to build it like right here. And they said, well, no, you can't do it. They have a Zumba class down there. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar project, and they've got a Zumba class. I think we could find another place for the, you know, you don't wanna upset those ladies of Zumba ladies, I mean, they're in shape.
No.
But, you know, it's like, you know, they had any excuse not to do that. I said, why don't you build it in Cheektowaga? You know, and I said, I don't go to Cheektowaga for anything, really. I mean, why would someone go out there to see a boat? This needed to be there, it was about the harbor and so on. So anyway, through that period, I and others were working on all kinds of alternatives. They were talking about, at the Naval Park, they were maybe taking down that metal building, what they call the hangar building. They said, well, we'll get that, we'll reassemble that over the ruins, that's the one up in the upper left-hand corner. I said, what we need to do is build a building like the one that used to be there, which I sketched up in the upper right-hand corner, and then we laid out all the specifications for how big it needed to be, because we worked all this for the actual construction. Finally we got through that. I'm not sure how, but once the boat was paid for, was going to be paid for, they were much more amenable to that. And then this is where the governor, the last good thing that Governor Cuomo did, was like, that seems like a good idea. So he gave Canal Side something like $5 million to build a building. We're thinking, look, you know, how about build a $2 million building? We were trying to build the cheapest building we could, but would look good, you know, a cheap building to get the boat built. In fact, they said you can build the building if you take the building down as soon as it's done. Anyway, so we were agreeing to do that. Then the state comes in and says, we'll pay for that building. And it's a beautiful building. I mean, it's absolutely exquisite in the interior.
Yeah.
In fact, I think there's a way, something I learned about state contracts. If you get $5 million, you better spend all of it. You know, you spend all of it. So the interior of that building has clear cedar wallpaper. I mean, it's clear cedar. It's like it's canoe building material. It doesn't have any knots in it and so forth. They could have done regular wallpaper. I mean, anyway, but nevertheless, it was done. So that was a win for us. This is and so this is actually this is the winter of 2019, 2020, and this is what the building looked like. People say, well, it looks like a Western saloon. Well, I'm sorry, this is how they were building these buildings. It's a work building on the waterfront. Anyway, and that's a little, the telephotos is a little truncated. But this is where the Zumba ladies, they moved over somewhere else. I haven't seen them for a while. This is, of course, when COVID hits, right? Remember the spring of 2020. Now we're all wearing masks, and we're trying to get this building built, and we're doing all this work. Finally, in September, the building was finished, and so Kathy Hochul came down, and we did the ribbon cutting. Now everybody's on our side. Everybody's on our side, building this in the boat. And Kathy Hochul was actually the lieutenant governor then. And as I like to say, she has bigger scissors now. But at least that was something. And she lives right in the area, lives right down the street, so she'd be riding her bike by as we're working on the building. Sean Ryan on the far right, the masked man, the other masked man with the glasses on there, is yours truly, probably the same jacket. Anyway, and Ryan. Anyway, everybody was there to celebrate this. So we were really on our way, and then the actual project begins. So we people had said to us, people had said to us. That you know, like, who's going to come down? I mean, who's going to come down and see this? You know, this is one of their arguments. Like, nobody goes down to the water in winter, and the answer to that was because nothing's happening in the winter. So you make something happen, and then what people go down there to have? I said, besides the hockey rink and all these, they're letting thousands of people out looking for a cup of coffee, you know, in the dead of night, you know, walking out there looking for something, looking to something to see, something to do, or whatever. So we said, we will do this. This is going to be a year-round project. We're going to be working on this summer, winter, and spring. And so we started. We started out by laying out the keel. This makes it all sound very easy now, but this thing, months of planning, years even. You don't find oak, for example, 65 feet long, which was the main length of the keel. So you have to make it up on parts. And while I have this image up here, you can kind of see this is a kind of the shiplap system that you use. It's used in ancient boats and so forth. where you make this little hook here and a little hook here, put those two pieces together, lock them together, and then you drive pegs in on the other side that forces those pieces in together. I mean, it's brilliant. I mean, it's how you grow a tree, you know, in an unnatural way. So we laid that down. The reason we have this is a temporary frame setting up, because people would come down and they'd say, we had a little gallery up here so people would watch things being built. And people would come down, it's like, when are they going to bring the boat down? And you know, and our response, it's already here. It's just not finished. So we had to kind of like, this is what it is. Plus we had models of the boat that we had done, and we had, you know, as many things as we had plans on the wall and so on. But the early stages were a little difficult. Again, who's going to come to see this? Well, when I first got into this whole boat thing, I did a tour of the coast of France, hitting all of the maritime museums and all of the maritime replica boats that were built along the coast of France. This is in 94. Every town had a boat. Every town had a boat that was specific to that area. I mean, sometimes these were 30, 40-foot boats, 100-foot boats, fishing boats, and so forth. It was a part of the culture of that coastline to build these replica boats. The same was true in England and Scandinavia. I mean, it's worldwide. It's a phenomenon. So I had some ammunition for why people would come to see this. They will come to see this. It's going to be an interesting thing happening. So at a certain point, we were getting a lot of people down there, particularly in the summertime, as the whole canal side thing was beginning to become more active, largely because of what we were doing. And so at a certain point, kind of late in the line, we said, you know, we really ought to find out where these people are from, and we were having casual conversations, so we put this map up. And, you know, it's really quite remarkable to see this. And everybody asked, like, this guy in Siberia, I mean, what's his story? Did he go back, or was he, you know, and one of the things I love about this is that we were, you know, everybody, well, this is the tourist thing, you know, people in Niagara Falls know all about this, and probably that's House as well. You know, that people are like, where are you from? Where do you go? And they want to tell you. They love to tell you. And an elderly couple came up, my age, and they were very interested in the boat. And just like, you know, I said, well, what brought you here? And they had this kind of peculiar accent. It wasn't like, not quite an Australian accent. And it turns out they were from New Zealand. And I said, well, what brought you here? He said, well, we've flown to San Francisco. We heard about this boat. So we flew to Buffalo to see the boat. And I'm thinking, I said, well, you're going to stop and see Niagara Falls? He said, well, maybe on the way back. And I thought, yes! You know, this is the first time ever, you know, someone's come to Buffalo to see something instead of Niagara Falls. And they weren't even sure if they were going to go see Niagara Falls. So I told that to the head of the Visitors Bureau and so on. I said, you know, this is a first. It's probably been going on a lot. And so that was really quite interesting. And they were interested in boats. And there's a whole world of people out there. Look at the water. I mean, anyway. Why wouldn't they be? So we're having in September, this September, the World's Canal Conference is coming to Buffalo. So these are people from all over the world, you know, everywhere, from India, the Netherlands, you know, Russia, maybe. So they're all going to be here in Buffalo at the time when we send our boat off on its trip to New York, which I'll get into in a minute. So anyway, this is going pretty fast here. I hope it's going fast. But you can see this is a big project. And it's very hard to appreciate that everything on this boat is custom made. Everything the only thing that we might get from Home Depot were a couple of 2x4 braces up there. But everything on the boat had to be custom made to its shape, and had to be formed to its custom shape. Even the frames, all of the frames, there are about maybe 6 or 7 of these frames in the middle of the boat that are the same. The rest of them are all changed, because as the boat changes, they have compound curves. The inside face of the frame is one way, but the outside frame is tapered. So they're tapered from here. This is going this way. As it comes down here, it changes in its angle. So each thing was custom made, and there are boating techniques, which I don't want to bore you with how you do that, how you figure that out, but it's all hand done. In addition to that, it's a little bit below the scene there, but in fact, well, it's all right. You can see them taking some patterns. We had to draw the boat out full size, which we did at our shop. We had a room up there about 65 feet long, a table 65 feet long. The boat's actually 74 feet, 73 feet. But we drew the plans of the boat full size, and by drawing the side of the boat and half of the top of the boat and mashing those two things together, putting on top of one another, you could, by magic, calculate what the shapes of those individual frames are. And so from that we made templates, and then we took those templates and then we cut out the wood to those templates and matched the templates, bolted them together. They're bolted with bronze bolts. We had an incredible crew of people who just had, there was somebody who could do anything on that. I mean, it was a real mixture of people that were quite remarkable. And there was always someone who could do something or had the expertise to do something that was just amazing. We had all these bronze bolts. We realized they're like $12 to $18 to $20 a piece, depending on how long they were. And one guy says, "We can make those." "You can make them?" "Yeah, I'll make them." So he went up to our shop, he and another guy, they bought the bronze rod and so forth, they threaded them, they peened over the tops, they built special gigs for these things. Started out, they did 2 a day. After a while, they were cranking them out. We needed 800 of them. So, I mean, it saved an enormous amount of money because and they loved it, they loved doing it. We made all of the hardware for the boat, all of the, the pins and gudgeons for the rudder and so forth were all made in the shop. There was somebody who knew how to do all of those things. We also had a dentist there. We didn't know how to use him exactly, but we would have enough time. We probably would have. But anyway, so this was a pretty complicated structure. And here you can see. I want to show you some 2x4s. See those white ones there? Those are 2x4s, probably from Home Depot. But that's it. And those weren't part of the boat. Those came out of the boat. But the elaborate way in which this whole thing is layered together is quite extraordinary. There's the keel goes down the middle. These frames stand up, and those are blocks, like square blocks of oak that stand between the frames, that the frames are then bolted to. And then on top of that, there's what's called the keelson, which isn't put in yet. It goes on top of that, and then there's a floor. I mean, so it's a robust boat, to say the least. It weighs 44 tons, when you're working with things that are this big and this heavy, everything has to be thought out, months in advance. And we were even beginning to worry at this time, like, how are we going to launch this? How are we going to get? We didn't have the presence of mind when we built the building to design the door first. Okay? So you get the boat in and out. Okay, that was like primary. Even when it did have, we had to take one of the panels off the top of the door because it was a little bigger than we thought. But so anyway, then I want you to appreciate the complexity of doing this. It's not like putting siding on a house when you do the planking of the boat. For one, the shapes all of those frames have to be perfect so that the plank will touch all of those ribs. The other thing is they're not parallel to one another. You put the first planks in and the bottom planks on, and then you have to fit these planks, which are wider in the middle and they taper to the end. Okay, so they're going like this. In addition to that, they're not straight because they have to climb up. They start up here and they have to twist up there. So they're twisted. So if you lay these planks out flat, they don't look like they look crazy. They have kind of like S curves in them and so on. All of that has to be done by fitting. And the other thing was that we only had, and this is the miracle of this, we had over 200 people working on this constantly. I mean, they were on shifts and so forth. Some people knew nothing when they started, had to be trained. Some people, we laughed about this, but you get people like, they come in, nostrils would flare, they smell the wood. I could work in a place like this. This is cool. This is, know anything about it? Nah, but pleasant place to work. It's like walking in a bakery and think, fresh bread, you know. And there are other people, the guy with a tool belt, the pickup truck outside, and my tools are a lot sharper. I'll use my own tools. You know, those guys. And what's wonderful, it created a new culture of people who got along with each other, who just, you know, the guy with the tool belt, you know, and the pickup truck full of tools and so forth, he would help the guy, the naive person whose nostrils were still flaring, and they would teach one another. And we had amazing people that just as there were a lot of people. So, and I can't remember their names, but they were there all the time. We see them often. Some of them I had a lot of personal contact with, others not so much. But I was listening to some guys who were painting the doors when we were getting to the end of the project. They were painting the sort of sliding doors on the side, and I listened to their conversation. What are these guys talking about? It turns out they were both space scientists from Mode, and they'd been involved in the shuttle, the space shuttle accident and so on. They were talking about kind of all the physics of that stuff. They did a damn good job of painting that door with white paint. You know, I think it was just even underpaint. But I'm thinking like, oh man, we got all kinds of people here that are way under their pay grade, and of course they're all working for free. This is the other thing. Apart from slavery, you know, which we hate to even think about these days, it's hard to get, you know, 220 people to work for nothing. For nothing, okay? Except just enjoying the work, you know. And we felt guilty about that, but you know, that was the project. That was how it worked. But we created a kind of a very interesting culture there that was, when we reached the end of it, when the boat was literally born or launched, it was like almost a panic, like we've got all these people. It's kind of like the army comes to town and sort of, oh, war's over, and now all of a sudden the town's got to deal with all these soldiers, you know, that are, you know, and so we immediately jumped into other projects, and we're still working on that, and we have another big project coming as well. Anyway, so this is so they're just fitting these planks together. There are moments in the building, in the boat building, traditional boat building, where you sort of take a rest. We've accomplished something, and this goes for small boats as well as big boats. As soon as the hull is enclosed, as soon as you have a floatable thing, you know, then you can put the masts on, the cabins on. That all comes later, but that's one of those moments where everybody sort of relaxes. It's called a whiskey plank. So we set up. This is in October. This is 2023. Yeah, we did the whiskey plank in October, and we did the drawing and the posters and so forth. But we were able to get the local distillery, the Buffalo Distillery, to make a special whiskey for us with our label and so on. Buffalo Distillery, and we I think we made about 40 bottles of this or so. So we had a big celebration and drank the whiskey. That will be available this summer, we hope. Once you do this kind of, once you get into the alcohol end of life, you know, it gets very complicated in terms of regulations. But we would like to sell this whiskey across the state. Anyway, so as we're working our way along, that whiskey plank was in October. And we're really beginning to think we've got to launch this boat in June because the Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation is going to kick us out of the building, because even though we had pled for this building for a long time, got the building built and so forth, because the state stepped in and paid for the building, it belonged to the state. And suddenly, just as we had predicted, when they said, who's going to want to go down there, or we're going to get stuck with a white elephant, some big building down there on the waterfront, we're not going to be able to do it. I'd said, you know, everybody's going to want this building. Everybody's going to want this. This is the best site in western New York, is right here, the terminus of the Erie Canal. It's a historic spot. Everybody's going to want it. Sure enough, the minute the boat boat building, the minute the building was under construction, people were coming up like, who's next? You know, like when are they going to get out of there? When are they going, you know, it's like, we're trying to build the boat, but when are you going to get out of there? What date? Well, and we had to negotiate and renegotiate to get the boat finished, because they wanted us out of there, because, you know, there was a nail salon or shoe store. Somebody wanted to go in, Bass Pro even was thinking of coming back. Anyway, that was a bit of a struggle. So we were kind of under the gun, and it's just like all these shows, you know, on television. Time was running out. The team had to rethink. How were they going to do? You know, that was like cut for commercial, then come back. You know. Anyway, that's kind of the status we're in. So we were working as fast as we could, double time and so on. But it gives you some idea of how much work there was to be done. We thought when we had the hull done, if anything, all this really tough measuring and stuff, hey, we're almost there. A great mistake we've known for years in boating. When you get the hull done, you think you're almost there. You're only about a third of the way there. The rest of it, even right down to the painting, is going to take far more time than you think. So and just to appreciate the complexity of this, that curve of the roof, there's a curve of the roof fore and aft. There's also a curve of the roof sideways. Again, so no two frames are alike. Everything has to be fitted. And that's the reason so it would drain. So we had, and there were wonderful people who, and I don't know, this is a perverse, when you look at kind of the workforce that we had pulled together, some people who just, they love doing these awful jobs. I'll climb under there. I couldn't even bend my body to get under there. This guy, you know, was lying on his back and trying to keep his mouth closed as he's, you know, putting caulk up in the bottom of the boat. It was some really awful jobs. So finally, we by the May or early May, just within weeks of launching, we were able to get it painted, and then the launching itself. Originally, the idea was we would be able to launch it right at the waterfront, right? Just go out, have a big truck with a crane. They got cranes that can lift anything, drop it or set it. You don't use drop anymore. Set it in the water, right in the canal, and that would be the big celebration. So forth. We'd be done. It turns out that that ground down there has been filled since 1820s. Okay, so it wasn't stable. If we were going to put these big trucks on there with a 44-ton boat, you know, was going to sink in there, it would have been dangerous. It wouldn't work. So we actually worked out that we'd have to take it down to the Buffalo Harbor, down to the Bethlehem Steel Plant, where they had a serious crane down there to do it with. So it had to come out of the building. That cost us more money than we had planned on. Nevertheless, had to be done. I mean, it had to be done. We had this big thing that needed to be born. So so we hired a group of riggers. There were two sets of people. One, the people who trucked it, the other people who set it up. From I think it was Higgins Riggers, and they came in and they brought this trailer truck, the biggest thing I've ever seen. It had like 48 wheels. 48 dual tires on it, and it stretched out. It could stretch out to 100 feet long. So they brought that up. They had to jack the boat up, which they did, and then set it on these sort of balloons. Then they slid that trailer underneath it, which extended itself, and then let the balloons out and let it set down on top of it. And here it was before she goes early in the morning, and this of course was this media stuff. I mean, the media, you know, we deal with them all the time. They love these, particularly like Spectrum News, you know, they love like 4:30 in the morning. Can you be there 4:30 in the morning? And then we'll tape until 9, you know, so they want this to be fresh. So, hey, I'm just here with, no, the boat's going to be heavy, you know. So you sit around freezing cold, and then, you know, you do another thing, and then you wait around another. Anyway, so they were there before the sun was up. So here's the boat coming out, and it was truly, I have to say, it was truly a kind of a, literally and pictorially, it was a birthing moment, you know. Here it comes out. We'd never seen the baby, you know. We've been standing up to it like this, you know, inside the building, and out it comes, you know. And the scary thing was, as in any birth, they had to put it back in just a little ways to straighten out the trailer to get it to come out. He said, "Oh no, it's going back." Anyway, so it came out, and you can see it was quite a crowd there. And again, for everybody, this was the first time we'd actually seen it. Stand back, and we'd done our drawings of it. We'd seen our drawings of it, and then it took a trip on the trailer. This trailer was so long, we could not imagine how they get around the corners. But you know, that was their problem to do this. So we're down in the harbor, and then we hooked it up to this crane. And this was extremely tense. We were on a boat. We were on the tugboat. We have a tugboat that's going to pull it. We were on the tugboat watching them do this, and they put the the straps too close together. Now, this is a 44-ton boat, so there's a lot of pressure on the ends, you know, to split it in two, or even just twisting it enough so that it leaks, because these are all hand-fitted plank. Anyway, Roger, the master carpenter, we were just very tense about that. Finally got in the water, looks like it's underwater there, and then this is our tug, which is the ancient boat. It used to be a steam tug. We own that now. So we drove it back up to the harbor, and then the crowd down there, and then other people were still back up at the harbor, and we brought her in, and this is where it's been. So I don't know where I'm in time here. Anyway, anybody have an early dinner? So now it's in the water. It was in the water in May, and we started to do sea trials, sea trials meaning, which is usually with the boat, sea trials, like take it out to sea. We say sea trials, as in canal. That's our little inside joke. But we took the boat, we brought it up to Tonawanda, went up to Lockport. We went later in the summer, we went all the way up to Rochester. And what we've been doing for a long period of time is we have been negotiating with the various cities along the canal for the 1825 bicentennial. So we have, and this is a job, you know, it seemed like an easy thing to do. And I remember saying this years ago. I remember saying, you know, we'll have the boat. You know what we ought to do? Because it was years away. What we ought to do, with the bicentennial, we ought to go down to New York City and do the wedding of the waters thing. You know, we got the boat, we got the canal. You know, why not? Everybody, yeah, why not? Well, you know, once you get that going, it's like organizing the Barnum and Bailey Circus. I mean, we got shore people. We got to do programs that every time we're stopping at 28, now 29 cities. We're doing Austin now, which is all the way to New York City to do this with our bucket of water from Lake Erie that we're going to be dumping in New York Harbor. So here's the plan. I mean, it has a few little tweaks have changed here, but launching inauguration May 24. That's done. Sea trials May 20th to September. We did that last summer. We sort of tried out how we get the boat through the locks and so forth. The winter berth, it's now in. We're in the center section there. It's in the up at the Lockport locks. You may have seen it up there. This big in brown wrapper sitting up there, sitting down in the mud. This is what they used to do, called bottoming out. When the canal would close in the winter, they had to do that for, obviously because of ice and destruction of the canal. Whenever they closed the canal, the boats stayed right where they were, so they go down. So if you were living in one of those small little towns, you hoped that that canal boat full of ruffians was not going to land in your town. And so the people in the town would try to get those people into church as quick as they could and out of the bars. But anyway, that's how they did it. So that's what we did it this year, because we don't have a permanent place for it to be right now. So it's in Lockport. In the spring, actually in May, they'll refloat it in the canal and bring it back down to Buffalo. Then we'll do more trials around here. We're going to try to hook it up with horses somewhere probably north of Lockport. I've talked to some people about that. Any of you happen to be horse people or know them? You know. Anyway, or speak the language. Anyway, so we have a person with 2 Clydesdales who says they're very gentle Clydesdales that is interested in doing this. So we could at least have do some films or whatever. North of Lockport, it's like, you know, all the way to Rochester, so there are no locks or whatever. So it's a perfect place to do that. Anyway, so we'll be doing all of that. Then in September of 24, we're going to start out with the World Canal Conference. Will be here. We'll be sort of the last thing on the schedule there at the end of September. They're coming in I think mid-September. They'll be here about a week or so. And we will basically, that'll be a big show-off time where we wave to them. And we're hoping that Kathy Hochul will be there, and we're trying to line her up for Albany, where she now lives, and New York City. And this is a hard thing for politicians to resist. You know, we found that when we started, you know, deciding which towns we were going to stop at. It's like someone who worked on the glass barge from Corning, so had done this, it's, you know, what you've gotta be careful of is who you leave out. He said, that, oh my God, you're gonna hear from every politician, why did you go buy Holly with a war, you know, what are we, chopped liver kind of thing? So this has been a diplomatic mission to kind of, to get this going. So the plan is we go to New York City, by the 26th. The 26th is when the Erie Canal, October 26th, the Erie Canal opened up. In reality, that was in Buffalo and October 26th. We're gonna be in New York City on October 26th. Reason is weather, and the canal will be drained by the time we try to get back. So we're gonna leave the boat in Albany and bring it back for the 250th anniversary of the USA, if it's still there, in next year. And we'll bring it back, and then we'll work the canal, you know, with various kinds of programs and so on. So I don't want to keep it too long, but here's the plan. Those dates are pretty much set for what we're going to be doing. We have visited every single one of those towns. We've met with their publicity people, with the mayors. Usually the mayors are in on this too. They're very much a piece of this. We work with the Canal Corporation, with I Love New York, with the Heritage Corridor and so forth. And virtually every group in the state that was involved with the canal, we've been dealing with. And I have to say, there's another we didn't see this coming, but when I was first kind of, you know, loosely, wildly thinking about, like, wouldn't it be great to do this, wouldn't it be great to do that, sort of thing, I thought, well, you know, when the Erie Canal bicentennial comes up, there's going to be all kinds of stuff happening, huh? Maybe we can kind of piggyback on some of these things. You know, the state's going to do this. It's a huge thing for the state and for the country, for the nation. They're really talking about a special license plate and U.S. stamp and so on and so on. So we thought we were going to kind of like get into this and get in with what other people were doing, piggybacking with them. Turns out we are the piggy. I mean, it turns out when you ask people from the state, like, what's the state doing for the Erie Canal? Well, in Buffalo, they've built a canal boat, which they're, so it's kind of like you go to the opera to hear something, and then you're doing the first aria, and they shove you up in the front of the stage. It's like I thought we were going to be following, and it's like, no, you know. So I mean, that's good in some ways, but it's also terrifying, because it's now we're the lead, and they're, what are you doing this? What are you doing? We're setting the schedule, we're setting the tone, anyway, and the other thing we're worried about, we don't have any control over, but this started out as kind of a lonely little thing the Maritime Center was going to be doing. It was a little project, and not little project, big project for us and so forth. And now it's swollen into something really quite amazing. We're kind of afraid that people may not be able to see the boat, because it's like the tall ships things, you know, the historic boat comes through, but it's got like 50 jet skis around it, you know, and speedboats and, you know, canoes and kayaks and everything. And so we don't know what's going to happen. We had a group call from Oswego River, Antique Boat Club. They want to come down and follow us to Albany. It's like, okay, that's fine, you know. But anyway, so it's quite exciting, and I would say, I just want to say one more short thing about we're planning the interior of the boat is going to be somewhat like a house museum. We're setting it up the way it would have been with DeWitt Clinton, because DeWitt Clinton was actually on the boat when he and Jesse Holly and some of the other notables were on the boat that went all the way down to New York City. And so, you know, I said, you know, standard joke for a long time was like, well, we want the governor on board, whoever she is. And people would laugh, whoever she is. A few months later, she was the governor. Okay, I mean, anyway, but we still got to get her. We still got to get her to do it. If there's not some other emergency, I'm sure she'll be there. There were a couple of other things too that I just want to point out, that when, you know, we were scrupulous about our integrity in doing this thing correctly. So the boat doesn't have an engine, it doesn't have toilets, it doesn't have any of that other kind of stuff. So that limits us in how we can exploit it. You know, it's not going to be a great wedding venue as in itself, which is what most people do these kinds of things for. But we wanted it to be authentic. So we did all of that in the construction of the boat, and while we were in the process of it, having made a big deal about this authenticity, one of the guys working with us, a brilliant researcher, comes in, he says, I got some good news and I got some bad news. He says, the good news is I found the certificate for the harbor the summer of July of 1825. That's the good news. And the boat we're building is 10 feet too short. You know, fortunately, you know, we were still at a point where we could add 10 feet to the middle of the boat. It wasn't, it was we just spread the boat out. And it didn't affect, hopefully, it didn't affect the hydrostatics of the boat at all. But that was like, oh my God, you know. And then the next time he came in, he says, we thought this was a packet boat. A packet boat is basically a mail boat, a passenger-only boat. It has windows all along the side. It would just carry people. He said there's no evidence, despite a lot of what people said, even in the 1880s and 90s and so, there's no evidence that it was a packet boat. And we're like, we'd already had hats, T-shirts, stationary, packet boat project, you know. It had a certain punch to it and so, but it wasn't a packet boat. What was it? It was a line boat. Line boat. So we have all this, it's now probably rare, T-shirts, but fortunately that was easier to do because a line boat simply carries cargo in the middle, and it allowed us to put these barn doors in the middle of the boat, which was the way they were designed. So, you know, we escaped that. But after that we said, okay, any other changes that take place, that's for some future person to complain about after we're all dead, okay? That's
Right.
their problem, okay?
Yeah.
Anyway, we've set up a whole routine about how we're going to be using the boat as kind of a house museum. People go on, and we're displaying in that cargo area kinds of materials that would have been moved along the canal, and we're setting up the front of the boat, which will be kind of like DeWitt Clinton's study. We push it with this historic tugboat as it's the towpath, you know, and the horses. That's another whole issue. But so learning to run this takes about 10 to 12 people handling lines, and 3 people on the tugboat, and going through locks, and so we push the boat on the hip before you hook it up with the stern half. So the rudder posts are the same. You can pretty well guide it along. We also have another little boat that goes to the side. Anyway, this is coming up through the last summer. We're starting to do some practicing some of our little side events. This is a classic picture. The first time a historic boat has actually been in one of the Flight of Five. And you heard some of the sea trials last summer. We have a wonderful carver artist who's part of the art conservation program who did this stern piece with Albany and Buffalo, taken from old images you can see on the end of the boat. Anyway, I will say this is where the advertisement comes in. The commercial. They're cut for commercial. So we have done, but we're doing second volume of this book, the Erie Canal, Perspective of 200 Years. We did the first volume, that came out last summer. I have copies of that if you're interested at $20, and the second volume of that is coming out in May, or June, probably early June. So there'll be a 2-volume thing, which has some very interesting essays in it, written, some of them by me and others by other members of our staff or group that we're working with. It deals with a lot of very interesting concepts that you generally don't get a chance to discover. For example, the people the engineers, the geologists who basically did a lot of groundwork for where the canal was going to go, they were the founders of Rensselaer Polytechnic. They were the first engineering schools in America, came from those guys. But they were in a period where it was like this is before Darwin. Okay, Darwin doesn't do his trip until the 1830s, so this is 1820s. So most people were still operating on a view of the world as the Great Flood, where all geology is described by the fact that everything was covered by water and then it drained. So and these are the guys who founded the engineering school. And so there's a whole article on that. Other things. Well, this is what they even had a theological interpretation of this, that God had actually left that after the flood. He left that there as an incentive for people to go in, and they were destined to go in and improve the land and finish His work. That was literally the concept of why there was that one crack in the land between Maine and Georgia. I kind of believe that. Anyway, so the Theology of Geology is one of the articles written by Marla Segal. The land purchases, the effects on the Haudenosaunee was a huge piece of what we did. We ran into, and this is kind of amazing, because when we started out, we had most of the traditional ideas about the Haudenosaunee and the Native Americans and so forth. We asked them, or they came in and asked us about the Erie Canal. We asked them about what are the Haudenosaunee, what are the Native Americans, what do the Senecas think about the Erie Canal. And oh my God, did we get a shot load for that. It's like, oh yeah, right. I mean, we stole this land from the Native Americans. I mean, you know, from the Western point of view, yeah, it's the greatest accomplishment of mankind, great engineering thing. For them, it was an invasion. And so we had for about 4 years an ongoing seminar with them about the effects of the Erie Canal, what it meant to them, we got into that discussion about invasion, they had a pretty darn good setup going there until we came in and put the canal right through the middle of it, and the sacredness of water, and we're messing with the water, and anyway, it was pretty rough in the beginning, but we worked out the idea that we really needed to pay attention to what that was. And this was the natural landscape of Native people divided up into geometric plots for sale by Americans. So all of this kind of cheating on the agreements and so forth were to sell land, so you've got this kind of greedy, like, divide that forest up into squares, and then you can sell those squares off to somebody from someplace else. So, that's something we have to deal with, and something that is really significant to think about. Not our fault. Our grandparents did this, our great-grandparents did it, but still, it's a reality. And we even got one of the Joe Stallman, who is the head of the museum, was at the time the head of the museum, the Seneca Museum, to write on the doctrine of discovery, which was a proclamation by the Pope in the 17th century, saying that if you found somebody in a land that you discovered and they're not Christian, it's yours. This is somebody in Rome telling people, oh, okay, so these people aren't Christian, so it's mine. So we developed this idea that this land is empty. Nobody's here. I was like, it's empty. Like, you don't see the Native Americans running around there with their own culture and their own civilization and so on. So anyway, he writes about that and what implications of that. And even though that was from the Catholic Church, everybody else in Europe jumped right on it. Yeah, oh yeah, that's right. That's the Protestants, the Lutherans and the Presbyterians and everybody else joined in on that. That's another one of the articles. Anyway, there's other thing is the painting. I did a lot of the illustrations in the book, and I just wanted to just say a couple words about the problems in doing historical painting. Like the boat, we're trying to make it as correct as possible. We can't just, there are a lot of really sloppy historical images and anachronisms and so forth, but for the purpose of this, we need to make it as right as possible. And that is a serious challenge. So even like the harnessing of the horses, and I go ballistic when I see bad illustrations. There's no way that horse could pull that wagon because you haven't hooked the two of them together, kind of thing. Anyway, so these are all from kind of measured drawings. There's drawings in the book of the canal being dug, and how those are the actual proportions of the canal. There's a drawing in perspective with indications of how big things will be from certain distances at that time, and from that evolving the image. So it's not just a sketch, it's a correct sketch. This is sort of like scientific illustration. Anyway, there's there's another one. All those figures and all those sizes and all those scales had to be right. So here's the boat in Lockport, and that's where, I don't have the picture, I have a picture of it somewhere, but that's where it's sitting down right now in that pit on that grassy knoll until the spring. So anyway, sorry I'm so long, but this story keeps getting longer as it keeps going on, so one day it will end. All right, any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, we have, well, so, it's not like, hey, you stay for a while. I mean, which would be nice, well, you can't actually do that, but, no, there's, once you get into this, there are all kinds of regulations, and rightfully so. I mean, there was no OSHA, dealing with our industrial thing, so but we had defibrillators, and we had, all kinds of stuff around there, safety equipment, and we had to wear glasses, and, so forth and so on, that you didn't have to do when, when labor and life were cheap. Anyway, so yeah, we have a lot of things like that, like you have to wear a life jacket when you're on deck, okay? And when you're down below, that's fine. So we subscribe to all of that stuff. And the number of people that could be, there are also regulations on how we use the boat. If we charge people to be on the boat, suddenly you go into another whole system where, you're going to have toilets, you're going to have handicap extra entrances and extras and so on. You got to be able to have two ways to get out of the boat. It's like, it's not going to look like a canal boat. It's going to look like, a trailer house. There's no compromise yet, and understandably. I mean, it's understandable. So anyone who goes on the boat, everyone who's riding on the boat has to sign on as crew. And this is going to be Kathy Hope too. Okay, I don't know if she's been a crew for quite a while, but anyway, so it doesn't matter how highfalutin they are, they got to be crew, and that means the captain's, the commander. But I mean, this is just these are realities. This is the 21st century, I think. Yeah.
Just real quick, I have an ocean liner question and I have a local question. One, might you rebuild one of the lifeboats from the Titanic?
Yeah.
And are you considering rebuilding the Canadiana? That last question is not serious.
Canadiana, well, we actually have something more immediate than that, which is the Columbia, which is a sister ship of the Canadiana.
A close cousin to it, yeah.
Which we are sort of ship's keepers for, which is down in Silo City.
Wonderful.
That's a long-range project, and we're hoping something can be done with that.
That's great.
The hull is redone.
That's great.
And what
Exactly.
was the question about the Canadiana?
Would you consider rebuilding one of Titanic's lifeboats?
Yeah, at some point.
In theory,
Before that, we have our next big project is going to be building LaSalle's Griffin.
Oh,
The
excellent.
Griffin,
Yes,
which
right,
is the
right.
first boat, well, you guys know, because it's right. It was built
Absolutely,
right
yeah.
there. The first ship on the upper, and it didn't have a good history. It never came back, but anyway, we could do a more permanent version of that.
Even better.
We're doing plans for building. This is something I've worked on literally for over 30 years. Is to get a waterfront site. We have a huge building down in Riverside. You can actually, from the top floor, you can see the water over there. But we need a waterfront facility where we can keep our boats together and where we can launch, where we can do other projects like this that are large. And the Griffin is about this size, much higher
Right.
boat. But,
Right.
So that's our plan. Yeah.
Good.
Oh yeah, well we did that. I mean, we had one of the big industrial, but we used to be down at 901 Furman Boulevard, which was the old Ford plant down there. We were there for about 3 or 4 years. We rented space there, and this is just after, I failed to mention that when in 2006 I retired from my professorship and we became a 501c3, which was a great thing because we didn't have all the restrictions of the college. the numbers of people grew. We moved down to that Ford plant down there off campus, the Ford plant. We had about a 80,000 square foot site down there. We paid something like $8,000 a year for rent for that place. And then NFTA owned the building, and NFTA just sort of decided arbitrarily that they needed $75,000 a year. It's like, this is not for profit. It's like, so we didn't need much more encouragement than that. We needed to get out. So we rented a place which was something like 1215 on Niagara Street, the old dog pound. We fixed that up, but it wasn't big enough. And then we finally found this place up in Riverside, which is the old American Diamond Tool Company, which was a huge building. I mean, so hundreds of some thousand square feet. And the best part of that was it was free. It was kind of like when the guy came in and said, "I'll pay for the boat." We brought one of our board members was a brother of the president of M&T Bank, and M&T has always been kind of supporting our. Anyway, we were going to hit him up for about $10,000 as part of a down payment for the building. Building wasn't that much. It had been abandoned for 3 years, whatever. And we were going to hit him up for some money for that. And he kind of knew it. He was propped, They get told ahead of time that you're going to go to that meeting. Yeah. So if you are thinking of paying, you can go to the meeting because they're going to ask you to do this. Anyway, in the meantime, someone else they sold the building out from under us. We'd sent our inspector over there to look at the building. Said, "Sorry, we've already sold it for cash." So we were in the embarrassing situation, going to ask this guy for money, and we didn't have the building to build. But we'd gone out and we'd found this other building, and we asked him. Said, we have this other building. We told him what happened. He says, "I think we own that building." And he looks at his phone, as one does these days. "Yeah, we own that building." And Roger, who our boat builder, and the new guy that I brought in as a director from out of town, he says, would you give it to us? He didn't even say, "Would you consider it? Would you give it to us?" I said, "Oh, jeez, that's a little bold, Anyway, and he looks up at the ceiling and says, "Yes." And again, my jaw is getting sore. It's like it keeps hitting the table. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, we can do that. We'll check and see if it's got any kind of back issues." He did have something like $5,000 in water bills or something that we had to pay. So we got the building, and it had overhead cranes in it. I mean, it's a terrific space. And we brought in several other groups to kind of join us, the Antique and Classic Boat Society. So we gave them a whole section which they fixed up. We now have a library of about 4,000 books, all boat books, all boat building history books. We have a bronze foundry, full bronze foundry that was given to us, all the equipment for the bronze foundry, a full machine shop. I mean, it's sort of 1970s vintage. In other words, it just doesn't have computers attached to it, but it's all the same stuff. We have a gallery that we made up. We have a show going on in the gallery on the history of the canoe, and we have classrooms and, as I said, overhead cranes so we can pick up these big boats and move them around. And we just bought another lot next to us, and the city is going to, or was going to, give us the lot behind us, between us and the school. So we're going to keep that building no matter what we do on the waterfront. But there've been a lot of miraculous things. I mean, just things you just don't think, like that building we got for free. Like, it took us a long time to clean it up and to fix it up, but it was a win-win situation because obviously bankers want to sit on something like that. Yeah.
And the other thing is, what I'm wondering is the building down at Canal site.
Yeah.
We've seen, actually, honestly, but
What's happening to that? Well, actually, fortunately, it is not the nail salon, I feel. Nail salon, but true stories. Those don't need to be on the waterfront. Neither did Bass Pro need to be on the waterfront. Those 65 our mantra for years. Those all need to be waterfront related things. And there's a bigger picture too. This is worldwide and certainly nationwide. That city planners are right coming back to the fact that waterfronts are not places for condos. Waterfronts, you can live across the street. There ought to be water thing, that needs to be something that, when we vacate the space, that we have somebody that's gonna be doing something relative to this. So I'm on one of multiple committees, but I've a long time been on the history committee of Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation. And they have hired a consultant about what needs to be done with that space down there. And, we've done plans for restoring the kind of, the walkway down there and the buildings of, used to be, you've seen pictures of veranded buildings, look like New Orleans, you know, running right along the way. But that building, we finally convinced them that needs to be a Erie Canal related facility, a museum. We're not using the word museum because people don't like the word museum. But it's going to be a kind of a visitor center there. And then, again, this is what always hurts, when you're out there scrambling to get all this money. And once they decided to do this, I don't know how much they spend on the consultants. We have to give the consultants all of our information, and then they go collect a check. You know, I mean, this is how it works, just how it works. Anyway, but they decided that we're going to do a visitor center there. So they hired a firm that is going to do all kinds of fancy displays, but we had some control over the content, the history museum and so on. We're going to have a thing on the Haudenosaunee, how it affected them. It's going to have about immigration. It's going to be about, you know, how this was. I mean, these are all hot topics in terms of our culture where we are right now. So it's going to be a good thing. It's going to be, and it wasn't really the best building, because originally there was an idea we might keep the building and do our boat building, but it's kind of a special building for that space. It's a 12-foot wall. You know, we need another purpose-built building for what we're doing. But it will be good. It will be good. We hope. Okay. Until the technology changes. Well, thank you. I appreciate your
Sure.
patience.
Very good. We have some refreshments over here. Please help yourself. Thank you for coming.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Find us online.